Good day. In today's session, we will look at the issue of the planning framework. You know, for a subject which is as complex as strategic planning, the planning process requires a lot of attention. What we have done so far is look at what is strategy, what is strategy. But now we are looking at what is strategic planning, what is the process of strategic planning. So we will understand the concept of planning, the hierarchy of planning, the strategic planning cycle, and the processes involved in strategic planning. Let's start this whole session with understanding the concept of the planning gap. The planning gap is a very simple but a very powerful concept. Where are we today? Where do we want to be in a defined time period? The difference between the two is the gap, which needs to be bridged by planning. It's important to realize that this gap could be in a whole lot of functional areas in the company. For instance, it is quite likely that a company which has an old company, which has therefore staff which have been with the company for a long time and have probably now come close to retirement. Many people have come close to retirement. The average age of staff in that company could be high. Given the fact that the environment today is changing rapidly, and given the fact that earning capacity at lower ages is increasing rapidly, given these two factors, the company might very well want its average staff age to come down significantly. Now, the company is at a particular point today in terms of the staff age. It wants to be at another point after some time. So how does it get there? This is the gap to be met by planning its recruitment strategy, right? Now, in quite the same way, if you look at a company which depends on one supplier alone, which depends largely on one supplier, and wants to be in a position where it can choose between suppliers in order to reduce the supplier power, in order to reduce the bargaining power of the supplier. Now, here the planning gap relates to moving from a situation where the company is in a single supplier situation to one where the company has a choice of suppliers. This again is a planning gap, but this is a planning gap in the procurement area. It's a procurement strategy gap. So, a planning gap can be in different functional areas. Let's take a brief look at this question of why is planning at all important? Why do we do planning? Now, a lot of people, it's often said that plans are not important, but planning is important. Plan, after all, is just a document. It's a document which can change. It's not a document which is sacrosanct. However, the process of planning imposes a certain discipline in the company. The process of planning focuses attention of all players within the company on the objectives of the company and how the activities of the company relate to the objectives. Very often, a company, after it has been in existence for a fairly long period of time, loses track of the original objectives, and it finds that its activities have moved into areas or have strayed away from the achievement of the original objectives. For instance, a company like HDFC, if it were to find that its lending processes had become so complex that the average man for whom it was originally intended could no longer be a beneficiary, then surely HDFC needs to review its strategy. This is something which the process of planning would throw up. This discord between objectives and activities is something which the process of planning would throw up. Then there is a question of uncertainty, right? Now, uncertainty is really the bane of all organizations. Uncertainty introduces an element of uneasiness in the working of the organization. Planning removes uncertainty by fixing milestones which need to be accomplished at different points in time. Leading from this is the fact that planning permits control. Now, you will all agree that control is a very, very important part of ensuring performance. Now, how do we ensure performance? How do we have control unless we have targets? And this is where planning helps us, because the process of planning involves setting milestones and setting targets of time and targets of cost. Ultimately, all this will lead to an increase in efficiency of operations. So planning leads to an increase of efficiency in operations. Now, there are really a hierarchy of plans. Hierarchy means levels. You have plans at different levels within the company. You have missions, you have objectives, you have strategies, policies, procedures, programs, and budgets. Now let's look at these one by one to see how they fit into each other. The mission describes the basic purpose of the organization. Objectives are the mission really elaborated into specific points. So the objective is an elaboration of the mission into specific points. Strategy, as we saw in one of the earlier sessions, is nothing but a course of action. How do we achieve those objectives? What is the course of action which will help us to achieve those objectives? That is strategy. Now, strategies are the elaboration of strategy is policy and procedure. Policies and procedures elaborate the concept of strategy. Policies support the course of action, and procedures are a customary course of action, right? So, we now come to programs. Programs are really a breakup of strategies. Strategies are a broad statement of how the objective is going to be achieved. Programs break up the strategy into more discrete activities. And then we have budgets. Budget is a statement of activities of a program in financial terms. It is a statement of inputs and outputs in financial terms. The great advantage of a budget is that it reduces all matters to a common denominator, and which is money.